So firstly, thanks everybody for attending our webinar today. I think it's webinar 13 now of our series starting back in March last year. So a lot to get through, as I said, and my name is Stephen Edwards. I'm the head of sales and marketing for Closomat, and really my role today is just to sort of facilitate, but we do have representatives from Closomat and also the OT service to take all of your chat today in Q&A. So do take advantage of the chat facility that's either at the bottom of Zoom or at the top, depending how you've got it set it up. And don't wait for the end of the presentations to ask any questions you've got, because as I said, we will have people on hand to deal with that chat for you. But there will be a session at the end. So if you can wait to the end as well, where we'll field sort of live questions from yourselves, from the team, but also the presenters today to answer any of the queries that you might have that weren't answered during the chat sessions. So if you can make yourself familiar with the chat, that would be great. Okay, so before I introduce the speakers today, what I wanted to do was, as those that are probably familiar with these presentations know, that there will be a couple of polls, and only 4 today, so we'll get through these really quickly. So the first poll is for shower chair suppliers. If you're supplying a shower chair to be used with a Closomat, where would you obtain it from? Would it be direct from the manufacturer, from loan stores, or other? Now for other, there'll be a couple of others for the other chats as well, and with other, if you just put that into the chat, that would be great if it's nothing that's on there. So I think at the moment some really good response rates. I think the majority, it looks like 2/3 from sort of loan stores and a third direct from a manufacturer. At least 7 or 8% of you have said other, so that's great. Put those in. Okay, we'll just wait. Brilliant. Thanks people for using the chat as well. Okay, we're up to sort of nearly 80%. So thanks everybody for that one. We'll move on to the next one. So the use of the wash-dry toilet. So if you've been an OT for a number of years, or even in the last few years, over that time, has the specification of wash-dry toilets gone up, gone down, or stayed the same as the DFG has increased over the same period of time? It's gone up and stayed the same is fighting it out at the moment. I think the majority have put stayed the same. I think roughly 2/3 of you. I'll just wait for a few more to vote. One of you has put gone down. That's fine. Thank you for that. I'll just wait till you just get the percentage up a little bit. Okay, there's still a few of you voting, so thank you for that. Okay, I'll finish that there. Thank you for that as well. Only 2 more. So on a similar vein, really, given that DFG has increased substantially over the last 5 years, based on your previous answer, which was either it gone up, stayed the same, or less, why do you think you answered as you did? So in here, this is absolutely, the only thing you can put in here really is through the chat. So it'd be great to understand what the rationale do you think as to why specification has gone up, why you answered it to stay the same, or indeed if there's no particular reason, then there is that option in here. Okay. Okay, I'll leave that one there. Lovely, thank you for that one. And the final one. So what could Closomat do to help you specify wash-dry toilets more often? And this is multiple choice, so you don't have to stick to one here. to provide more product training online, provide more product training face-to-face, provide product training videos for you and your team, provide a service user-friendly product video, so for your client, better access to working demonstrations for service users, on-site service users demonstrations with real products, and if there's any others on there that we're not mentioning, and I'm sure there are, again, please add those into the chat as well. So really mixed across the piece, actually, which is interesting. I think the biggest percentage on here is provide a service user-friendly product video. So with my marketing hat on, I'll take note of that one. Okay. Okay, still coming in. Okay, brilliant. Thanks everybody for those. And do, if you've got any other ideas around that, then please carry on with the chat, as I know a number of you already have, as we're carrying on. Okay, brilliant. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the speakers today, which, so we've got Kimberly Lawson. Those who are here right from the start will probably remember Kimberly presenting at one of these webinars. And Kimberly is a product specialist for Scotland for Closomat. And Kimberly will take you through the Closomat content later on. And then also Lucy Leonard. I'm sure a number of you know Lucy from the OT service, and Lucy's also presented on a number of these webinars as well. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Lucy to take you through the main content for this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this webinar this morning. I don't know what the weather's like by you, but in Northwest England, it's absolutely beautiful. So if you've taken time out of your day, whether you're working or not, it's much appreciated. So today's webinar, I'll just go through the learning outcomes. So we're going to consider the impact of stroke on function using activity analysis. We're going to reflect on the role of adaptation to support rehab, review the use of the Disabled Facilities Grant to support long-term needs, and we're going to have a look at bathroom and toilet adaptations to support specific neurological deficits. So hopefully we will cover a lot of the issues with regards to people who've experienced a stroke and look at how we can adapt the environment to suit them. Obviously this is a huge topic and time is limited, so really it's going to be a snapshot around the topic. However, there is some references at the end which you can go away and have a look at and do some more learning in your own time, hopefully. Okay, so if we start off with the basics and talk about what is a stroke. So a stroke is a life-threatening medical condition that happens when blood supply to part of the brain is cut off, basically. So a stroke can be broadly put into two categories, and that is an ischemic stroke where the blood supply is stopped because of a blood clot, and that's the majority of stroke cases. That's about 85% of all stroke cases are because of a blood clot. And then the other type is where a weakened blood vessel supplying the brain burst, so that's kind of like a bleed on the brain. So there's two different types, and we're going to go into further detail about how strokes are classified. And actually, this is quite unbelievable, but globally, stroke remains the second leading cause of death after heart disease. So it's the second leading cause of death around the world. It's a leading cause of death and disability in the UK, and there are around 32,000 stroke-related deaths in England each year. And unbelievably, 1 in 6 people, so 1 in 6 of us will have a stroke at some point in our lifetime, which I think is absolutely incredible when you think there's 180 people on this webinar at the moment. 1 in 6 of us will experience a stroke in our lifetime. Most strokes, around 59%, occur in people over 70, but there's around 38% of first-time strokes happen in adults aged between 40 and 69. So we know strokes can happen to younger people, but I think 38% when I found out these statistics, that's probably a lot higher than I thought. So yes, around 38% between the ages of 40 and 69. Now, although deaths related to stroke have declined by around about 49% the last 15 years, we need to think about the impact on stroke survivors. And I think the reason why they think the reason why the number of deaths has come down is because of better preventative measures, earlier treatment, better treatment. And we've all seen the adverts, haven't we, about we need to act fast and recognise the symptoms of a stroke, because it's about that early intervention that can prevent disability and impact on function. So I think a lot more people are aware of strokes and the symptoms of them, so people are getting earlier treatment. But there are more of an increase in the number of stroke survivors and people left with residual disabilities and issues with activities of daily living and daily occupation. So this has an impact on access to community resources. So we need to consider the stroke survivors, not just the deaths. So the common types of stroke, the Bamford Classification divides people with stroke into 4 categories. This is according to the signs and symptoms of which they present. And the classification is really useful for understanding the likely underlying pathology, which in turn then gives an idea on the best treatments that will be most useful and the prognosis as well. It's a relatively robust and simple classification using clinical information. So they're the 4 types of strokes. And then the type of stroke is coded by adding a letter. So for example, I for infarct. So it just gives a little bit more information. So this is quite useful, is if you're accessing GP notes or looking at hospital notes, because sometimes you see things and you think, what the heck is that? And this is really helpful to understand the type of stroke that occurred. And then if we can start predicting the impact on function, because as occupational therapists, it's important to understand the medical background and the medical history of somebody, but what we're interested in is the impact on daily occupation and occupational performance. Okay, so what the classifications mean to function. So the lacuna type of stroke will be either a motory or sensory deficit only. The partial anterior circulation, that's classified by having 2 of the following. So either motor or sensory deficit, higher cortical dysfunction or hemianopia. The total anterior circulation has to be all of the following. So motor or sensory, cortical and hemianopia. And then I'm just going to move myself because I'm covering my, there we go, that's better. Posterior circulation is isolated hemianopia, brainstem signs, and cerebellar ataxia. So we need to start thinking about, when we're looking at the medical history of somebody and we're looking at what type of stroke they had, what as occupational therapists we need to be doing is thinking about what those letters and that type of stroke mean to us and how we're going to assess that person. So depending on which of these regions in the brain the stroke occurs, the effects may be very different, and I'm just going to go into a little bit more detail of how that is going to present itself. So the cerebrum is the part of the brain that occupies the top and the front portions of the skull, and it's responsible for controlling movement, sensation, speech, thinking, reasoning, all those important cognitive functions that we just take for granted. It can also affect emotions as well. So people with a stroke in this part of the brain can become emotionally labile. And the cerebrum is divided into the right and left sides or hemispheres. So that's the main area where strokes occur. So depending on the area and the side of the cerebrum affected by the stroke, any or all of these functions might be impaired. So this is really important to understand. So movement and sensation, speech and language, and that's receptive language as well. So we need to think about, if somebody's had a stroke, their ability to understand our communication with them and whether they're able to take on board information that we're saying and assimilate that information. Eating and swallowing can be affected, vision, cognitive issues, as I've mentioned, about thinking and reasoning and judgment and memory. And we need to think about the impact on that of rehabilitation. So if somebody's severely affected with their cognitive function and we're looking at rehabilitating them, what impact their cognition is going to have on their success in recovering from the stroke. We need to think about perception and orientation to surroundings by a stroke, the ability to look after ourselves in terms of self-care. Bowel and bladder control can also be affected. Again, emotional control and sexual ability, which is something that as occupational therapists we need to be looking at if we're going to undertake a holistic assessment. So the effects of a right hemisphere stroke may include some or all of these. So it's really important when we're looking at the type of stroke somebody's had, it might be good to refer to this. So right hemisphere stroke will affect somebody's left side. So give them a left-sided weakness or paralysis, or affect their senses on that side of the body. It can produce a left-sided neglect, visual problems, including an inability to see the left visual field of each eye, issues with depth perception, which is really important in terms of daily activities. When you're reaching, when you're moving around, that depth perception can really increase somebody's risk of falls. Proprioceptive deficits, and I'm going to talk a little bit later about that in terms of function and toileting and personal care. Inability to understand maps and find objects such as clothing or toiletry items. A right hemisphere stroke might affect somebody's memory, and then behavioural changes as well, because it's that frontal part of the brain. So it might make somebody a bit more impulsive. I've worked with people who sometimes their behaviour can be inappropriate, and they can make sort of inappropriate comments without realizing, because they don't understand the impact of their behavior, and also can lead to depression as well. So the effects of a left hemisphere stroke are slightly different. That would produce a right-sided weakness or paralysis and sensory impairment, problems with speech and understanding language. Visual problems would be on the right side of the right visual field, and is more likely to impair somebody's ability to organise and reason and analyse. And if we think about, and I'm going to talk a little bit again about this later, but if we think about the organisation it takes just to get up and go to the toilet and go to the bathroom and have a shower or have a bath, we take for granted sometimes the organisational abilities in terms of where you're going, getting there, how you're doing that. And that's where activities analysis is really important, to break a task down, to understand how we can rehabilitate somebody and how we can support them to do what is a simple activity. But this is how a stroke can affect somebody's function. The behavioural changes, again, it can lead to depression, but it's more about the left hemisphere stroke causes cautiousness and hesitancy. They might have an impaired ability to read or write, and that's really important when providing literature. We need to make sure that we're providing literature for patients that there is in an accessible format to them. So would they be better looking at a video or something online? And again, the inability to learn new information. So again, this is really important when we're thinking about rehabilitation and whether we need to look at more compensatory techniques to enable somebody to improve their occupational performance. And again, memory problems can be caused by a left hemisphere stroke. So the effects of the stroke in the cerebellum are slightly different. The cerebellum receives that sensory information from the body through the spinal cord. So it helps to coordinate muscle actions, gross and fine movement, coordination, balance. So it's generally, it affects mobility. Strokes are much less common in the cerebellum area, but the impact of the stroke in that area can be much more severe. So 4 common effects of stroke in the cerebellum include inability to walk, so issues with mobility, problems with coordination and balance, and people can have anything from mild to severe ataxia with a stroke in the cerebellum. They may experience dizziness, headache and nausea and vomiting because of the impact of dizziness on their balance. The effects of the brain of a stroke in the brainstem are can be extremely severe because many of the body's life support functions, such as the heart, heartbeat, blood pressure, breathing, they're all controlled from the brainstem. The brainstem also helps control the main nerves involved in eye movement, hearing, speech, chewing and swallowing. So it can lead to severe issues with breathing and heart functions, body temperature control, balance and coordination again, causing weakness and paralysis, and obviously issues with chewing and swallowing and speaking. The impact of a stroke in the brainstem can often lead to people becoming, unfortunately, in a coma, and the risk of death is quite high with a stroke in the brainstem, just because of the part of the brain that affects those bodily functions. So the outcome for somebody with a stroke in the brainstem isn't always favourable. So it's always important to sort of cover the medical background of, I'm just checking the time, whatever condition that we're looking at, because I think it's really important to get the basics and understand that. But as occupational therapists, what we really need to be looking at is the impact of that on daily activities. So we're going to be thinking mostly about the bathroom. So we think about something like brushing teeth. And if you have somebody who has some kind of neglect or inattention, we need to be thinking about where the toothbrush and the toothpaste is placed, where it can be best found by somebody. And proprioception, which you're probably aware, is the ability to know where your limbs are in space without looking at them. And we use proprioception all the time without thinking about it. But when we're cleaning our teeth, it might be that somebody has to use proprioception because they can't actually see where they're moving their hand to clean their teeth. So things like the use of a mirror could be helpful in that situation. I think proprioception is something that's really important to consider with toileting, because we basically, when we're wiping ourselves, we have to use proprioception to coordinate using getting the tissue and wiping ourselves, and that can have, if somebody can't do that, that can have a huge impact on their ability to remain independent in toileting. So as occupational therapists, we really need to be considering that as part of our assessment. So if we know somebody's having difficulty with proprioception, then we need to be drilling down in that assessment and asking them how they're managing with these daily occupations that they were possibly managing prior to the stroke. And obviously the issues with bowel control as well can have an impact on somebody, not only managing their bowels, but also on how they feel about that, and how we can help them manage that. So we need to think about, it's really important to get those basics around the stroke, find out where it happened in the brain, what type of stroke it is, the Bamford Classification. But really we need to be thinking about in our assessment how the signs and symptoms of the stroke are affecting occupational performance. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about rehabilitation. and rehabilitation and compensatory strategies in the frame of reference. Okay, so just what is rehabilitation? I think it's a word that we use quite a lot, but it's quite interesting to find out the World Health Organization definition, which is a set of interventions designed to optimize functioning and reduce disability in individuals with health conditions in interaction with their environment. And I really like that definition because I think that fits so well with occupational therapy and what we do. So we do have this toolbox of interventions as occupational therapists, and that is that the whole role of us is to optimize functioning and reduce disability. And that word environment is really, really important because as human beings, we are interacting with our environment, and sometimes we have to adapt the environment to suit somebody's needs. We can't always provide an intervention that's going to improve their function. So in that case, we have to look at adapting their environment so somebody can interact with it to function at their optimum. So I just really like that definition and how it fits with occupational therapy as well. So if the environment, if we think about the home environment specifically, if it's disabling a person, so if because of their stroke and their signs and symptoms, they're finding that the environment is disabling them, what approaches can we implement to complement rehabilitation and optimize functioning? So there are three sort of frames of reference that all kind of overlap. So the compensatory frame of reference aims to improve occupational performance and independence utilizing compensatory techniques. And that's often used alongside an educational approach. So an educational approach is working with somebody to teach them new techniques. And finally, the adaptive model or frame of reference. And this begins with looking at the environmental demands for mastery in activities. And it's about having environmental control, which is really important in somebody's home. So if they've been affected by a stroke and it's having an impact on their ability to function in their home environment, that ability to having control over their environment is really, really important. Because sometimes I think with a stroke, everything can feel like it's been taken away from them, that independence and that functioning. So that's where we need to work as occupational therapists to give somebody control over their home environment. So I'm just going to touch on adaptation to support rehabilitation. So adaptations, and hopefully that's why you've come on the webinar, because that's something that you're interested in. And that's something that I'm really passionate about as a housing occupational therapist who's worked for many years in equipment and adaptations. I can see the impact on adapting somebody's environment to improving their quality of life and their independence. So we're just thinking about the bathroom and thinking about toileting, as I've mentioned, and how a stroke can impact somebody's ability to be able to function in the bathroom. And if we're looking at somebody's ability to sit on the toilet, then somebody who's had a stroke and has problems with inattention or problems with sitting straight, or if they're leaning to one side, there are products available that have lateral supports to enable somebody to sit on the toilet safely so they're not leaning to one side. And this is an example of a product, the Palma Vito, with the fold down support arms, and that gives somebody the ability to push either on one or both arms to transfer on and off the toilet. And with this particular product, it doesn't matter if they're pushing down on one side because the arms are integrated into the toilet. So that's a really good thing to consider if somebody's only able to push down on one side. And then we've got something called the Air-Alert vertical shower seat. And this is something that can be adjusted in height to help somebody to transfer on and off the shower. And again, with the arm support, you can use either one arm or both arms to assist in sit to stand transfers. So sometimes we can give people a shower chair and we can set it in an appropriate height and they still can't transfer independently. But it's good to know that there's something available that adjusts in height to enable somebody to raise it up to assist with transfers. And this is a product that I've used such a lot, the touch sensitive hand or foot switch. And if we go back to the signs and symptoms of a stroke, you remember those issues with proprioception and organisation. And if you think about toileting as an occupation and break it down into the component parts of what you need to do when you're on the toilet, you need to clean yourself and you need to stand and you need to flush the toilet. This product will do everything for you. So it's just what you can set it up so it's just one touch and it will go through, it will flush the toilet and it will go through the wash and dry cycle in one. So a person who might struggle to learn new information or who may have memory problems will only have to press the switch once and it will flush the toilet and go through the wash and dry cycle on a wash dry toilet for them. So that's something that I have used very often with people, not just with stroke, but with brain injury or learning disabilities. It's just a really simple thing that we can change as part of the environment to support somebody's ability to engage in that really important occupation of toileting. So really, I think in terms of adapting the environment, it's as I said, it's important to understand the stroke, the type of stroke. And actually, when you're reading somebody's notes or you receive a referral, you can start thinking about, if you know the type of stroke you've had, you can start thinking about really making that a client-centered assessment that you're going to do and pre-thinking about what sort of problems that the person may be having. And I think as an occupational therapist, we say we do a holistic assessment, and I truly believe we do, but I think if we're going to be truly person-centered, it's important to fully understand the impact of somebody's condition on their ability to function. And sometimes we have limited time when we go and see clients. We may have a few clients booked in our diaries for the day. So if we get an understanding of how somebody might be presenting before we meet them, it allows us to really home in on how we can support them. And it helps with that initial assessment. I think it's vital to cover falls alongside talking about strokes. So people who've had a stroke are at high risk of falls in all stages of their recovery. So obviously in the hospital environment, they're at high risk of falls in the acute stage, but it's important to remember that when somebody's been discharged from hospital or they've had a period of rehabilitation, they are still at risk of falls when they're at home. And possibly the risk of falls obviously is due to the issues with motor weakness or mobility problems, but also the cognitive function where people might be rushing because they've not got a full awareness of their impairment and not a full understanding of the difficulties that they're having, whether they're trying to do two things at once, whether they're not fully planning ahead and they're not executing tasks in the most appropriate way. So this is where we can really work with our clients to have a look at how they're undertaking activities and how we can reduce the risk of falls. So thinking about rehabilitation and compensatory techniques, the falls reduction interventions that we need to consider are things like colour contrast. So in a bathroom, making sure that there's a contrast between the colour of the floor and the colour of the toilet and the wash hand basin. We need to think about appropriate lighting and make sure that we're avoiding the creation of shadows. I know some people like fancy lights in the house, but we need to think about the impact of good lighting and how that can help prevent falls. And then We are experts in environments, aren't we? And that's what we do as occupational therapists. We have a full understanding of the home environment and the impact of that on function. So we really, if we've got the opportunity to remodel a bathroom because somebody's had a stroke and somebody is mobilizing, we need to think about the placement of the toilet and the wash hand basin and the shower and where the shower chair is going to be placed, because the more somebody has to turn and move, the higher the risk of falls. So often I'm involved with technical officers or architects looking at plans. And I think this is really important, where we need to work alongside our colleagues in housing and those who are sort of an expert in buildings, where we put our heads together and come up with the most appropriate plan for somebody to function most efficiently in their home. So just some of the legislative challenges that we need to consider, and mostly thinking about disabled facilities grants, which many of you, I'm sure, will work within the constraints of that legislation. So I'm going to touch on the word disabled and what that means. I'm going to quickly, because I'm aware of the time, cover a little bit about what's reasonable and practicable and necessary and appropriate. So just quickly, the Equality Act 2010 defines disability as a physical or mental impairment that has substantial long-term effects on the ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. It's a really broad definition. And long-term means over 12 months. So the question that we need to ask ourselves is, how can adaptations be supported if long-term means more than 12 months and rehabilitation is ongoing? So how do we forward plan for somebody who might be in the initial stages of rehabilitation, and they may take, their recovery may take several years. So we need to think about our robust clinical reasoning when we're recommending adaptations for somebody. So working within the grant legislation, we are looking at what is necessary and appropriate, and those words are taken from the legislation that covers disabled facilities grants. So as occupational therapists, we decide what is necessary and appropriate for the client that we're working with. And how we do that is part of a holistic assessment, and that is hopefully not sticking to any preset criteria. That is utilising all the skills and knowledge that we have about occupation, occupational performance, function, and we also need to sometimes get get the help and support of all the health and social care professionals. So we might speak to a physiotherapist and find out somebody's prognosis on their mobility. I know quite often I will speak to specialists in the stroke and obtain sort of their ideas on how somebody's going to progress, because sometimes it's difficult when you're assessing somebody in those early stages after stroke to imagine how they're going to be in 12 months' time. We should always involve the client or the patient, the carer and the next of kin where appropriate, and get their views and understanding of what they want from the occupational therapy assessment. And we need to communicate what we are recommending by using really robust clinical reasoning, because quite often what we're recommending is questioned by the housing department because they hold the budget in terms of the DFG. So sometimes we have to be really, really robust in our clinical reasoning on why we want the layout of a bathroom in a certain way. And we really need to support what we're doing by using that knowledge that we've gained through experience or through supervision, and also sticking with the code of conduct, which covers things like dignity, the dignity of our patients and clients, and whether we are facilitating dignity through our recommendations. So the reasonable and practicable part of the recommendations are determined by the local authority. And what they will do is they will look at the age and the condition of the building. They might even consider things like the impact of an adaptation on other residents. and they are within their rights to consider rehousing if it's appropriate, if adapting the property isn't going to be appropriate because of the type of building it is. I've worked with people who lived in mobile homes and caravans, members of the travelling community, and it's been quite difficult at times to adapt their property. So we need to sort of work together with the local authority to support somebody and consider rehousing if that is appropriate, but it might not always be appropriate or wanted by the client. And I don't think there's anything wrong in acting as an advocate for the people that we work with and speaking on behalf of them and supporting them to do what they want to do. We need to remember that the local authority are the gatekeepers for the DFG budget, and therefore our clinical reasoning needs to be really robust if we're asking them to spend £30,000 on a property, and we need to be able to defend our decision making. Okay, so in summary, the areas of the brain affected by stroke impact the signs and symptoms of a stroke, and these signs and symptoms have an influence on function and occupational performance. So when we are finding out about the type of stroke somebody's had, we need to, as occupational therapists, think about how that's going to affect their occupational performance. Rehabilitation is key, and absolutely the home environment can impact the success of this. The effects of the stroke can last over 12 months, and disabled facilities grants can support environmental changes to aid that rehabilitation process and improve occupational performance. So there are some references there. I don't know, I haven't been able to see what's in the chat box, so hopefully you've managed to have a little chat in there and have some questions answered. So that's it from me. I'm going to hand over to Kimberly Lawson, who's a product specialist for Closomat, and thank you very much for your time today.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Lucy. I'm sure you all found that very informative. I certainly did. So thanks again, Lucy. That was great. So I am Kimberly. My name's Kimberly Lawson. I work for Closomat and I cover Scotland, which I'm sure you can get from my accent. I have been with Closomat family now almost 2 years, and I'm going to take you through a little bit of information about Closomat. Okay. So what do we do? So we are not just a wash dry toilet. We have plenty more products, but we also have things like aerolates, which many of you may have used previously as well. Lucy spoke there about risks and falls, and if you put the Palma Vito and the aerolate together, that can help reduce risk and falls and give a one-handed care option for a client. So we also do changing places. We take complete control of that from start to finish, project management, survey, right through to installation. We do chairs and changing benches. I've seen a bit of chat about shower chairs on there, so we do shower chairs also. We use the hoist systems. We're currently using LIGO hoists, and your shower seats. Lucy touched on the shower seats there, but we do have other options. We have hand wash basins also, drop down rails, and we do the body dryers, which I'm sure many of you have come across. So I'll tell you a little bit about Palma Vito. We are the UK's #1 wash dry toilet. We do have the most effective wash dry performance because we give 8 litres in a 1-minute wash cycle. We're versatile and we're adaptable. So Lucy touched on there people who have maybe had a stroke. So likewise, if we've got someone with a degenerative condition, we can adapt the toilet to accommodate that. When someone's had a stroke, there is option for that client to get better. So where you might have someone initially needing a shower chair, as they get better, we can then adapt the toilet in the opposite way, you know, to accommodate the needs as they change. The Closomat is probably very simple for everybody to use. It's hands-free, you know, we can simply use it with elbow touches, and there are other flushes available, which I'll touch on as we head through. We have a safe working load of 30 stone. However, if we do have bariatric clients, we can accommodate up to 57 stone. And we offer something called Palma Life as well, which I'm going to touch on now for you. So Palma Life is now available. Many don't probably know it can go through in England, not in Scotland, unfortunately, through the DFG. That information came from Paul Smith. So the advantage of Palma Life for you and your client, initially for your client, is, you know, if you've got Palma Life, your client, if they have any issues with their toilet, they pick up the phone to us and we come out and everything's covered, parts, labour, and they get their annual service as well. The advantage to yourself as an OT is your client then isn't coming to you with a problem which is taking up your time for you to then try and sort that out and get in touch and sort a repair and, you know, go down that line. So for yourself, that there's time saving attached to using the Palma Life. So Closomat solutions. Lucy touched on our integrated arms, which was great. The advantage to the integrated arms is these can be added or removed at any time. So as I said, if things change with your client, we can adapt that. And I mentioned there initially about the aerolet. So in the picture, we've got the tilting. We also do the vertical. And these can be added, as I said, at any point. If the Palma Vito is already in situ, we can add it, or we can do them both together. And again, both together will help reduce your risk of falls and things, and also then improve confidence. And sometimes, as you know, a lack of confidence, thinking you're going to fall, can then, you know, make you fall as well. So some solutions, this is some flushing solutions. Lucy touched on the touch sensitive switch. As she said, it's very, very popular. The advantage to it is the memory usage for using it. You know, it's the same action every single time. It can be pushed by any body part that is able to push it as well, so it is very flexible. We have your proxy switch, which is infrared. You just wave your hand in front of the proxy switch and that will do the wash dry sequence for you also. And we've got the infrared remote control. So this kind of comes into its own if you've got a client who can toilet themselves but is unable to flush at all. Gives them back the independence of being in the bathroom alone without having someone to assist them. They can then let whoever's outside know that they're finished and they can then use that control and flush for that person. So what do product specialists do to support you? So I'm a product specialist, as I said, I cover Scotland. So we take responsibility for the whole process. We can go and see clients on our own and have a conversation with them and spec and survey for their Closomat, so we can look after the whole client assessment. Those can be on-site or remote, and I'll speak a bit about remote in a minute. We look at the product specification and what would be required. We also do demonstrations if that is what's needed, and we look at the survey information that we would need to know about installation. So that's what we look at. The remote surveys, I'm sure many of you, if you have used Closomat in the last year, have at one point used a remote survey option. So these are fully risk assessed. We document anything if we go on site as well. If we do go on site, there's a 2-metre distancing. The remote survey at the moment, what we are trying to do is, we know now that things are freeing up, occupational therapists are busier. That's the feedback I've certainly had in my area. And what's working well is I'm giving the occupational therapist the option if they want a remote service or a face-to-face, depending on what's best for the client and the occupational therapist. If we can do it remote, it means it speeds up the process for both the client and occupational therapist. It cuts down time for the occupational therapist because it usually just involves a phone call and a conversation. and it means occupational therapists can get their quote that day or the next day, and it allows you then to have a figure to move forward with funding if you need to. However, as I said, there are complex cases. We are there to do face-to-face as well. So at the moment, we're doing a mixture of both, depending on, as I said, what is best for yourself and your client ultimately. As a product specialist, we also do virtual team meetings. These are usually organised through your head OTs. However, if anybody is interested, please let us know and we can get in touch and arrange one for you. They're CPD qualified. They last for approximately an hour and we fit them into what date and time is best for yourself. And these are really good. We can look at, depending on what you want, if you want to look at more on installation and considerations for that, or if it's specification, we can adapt it accordingly depending on what you or your team are required for that. So what do we do for your clients? So we take responsibility for the welfare of your clients, and the way we do that is through our warranty and service. So warranty and service are two different things. So warranty normally you would get with a product. So say for example, you went out and bought a new product, you would have a year's warranty on it, or a new vehicle, for example. But if that was expensive, like a boiler or a vehicle, you would then look to take out a service package. And the Closomat isn't any different from that. So the advantage of having your warranty and your service together will maintain your unit for your client. So it protects you and your client and the investment you've made. There's no repair or call out charges, very similar to what I said about Palma Life. It's protected, it protects the grant funding as well, and protects the end user. There's nothing for them to pay for going forward, because usually it's covered under the warranty and service. It takes responsibility away from you and your contractors for repairs, similarly to what I said about Palma Life. And ultimately it leaves everything to us as a direct contact as well. And as I touched on previously, it's covered under the same DFG as Closomat toilet. So ultimately, if you think about it, we've got the bathroom covered. Whatever you need from your lifters, your wash dry toilet, your Lyco hoists, your benches, and we also do your rise and fall sinks and things like that. If you take all of that together, everything that you need in the bathroom here at Closomat, we can cover that for you if that is what you're looking for. Okay, so I would like to say thanks for your time, and I'd like to hand you over to Stephen Edwards.
Thank you, Kimberly, and also thank you to Lucy as well. Some really useful and I hope practical advice and information for you all today. So just to sort of close, I just wanted to sort of talk through the learning outcomes from today, just to review those. So hopefully you've understood how to reflect on the use of adaptations as part of the rehabilitation plan, consider the application of long-term conditions in relation to adaptations and rehabilitation, and hopefully there's been a discussion through chat as well around the adaptations and considerations specific to stroke recovery and rehabilitation. I certainly found it extremely useful, and I hope everybody else did. If you need more information from us, do email us at info@closomat.co.uk. There's a live chat facility on our website from 9 till 5. It's a great resource. We've got experts on the other line. So if you've got any questions, whether it be product related or indeed sort of medical related, then do drop onto the live chat, and there will be somebody there that can help you. There's also our website with a wealth of information, of blogs, articles, etc., and hopefully you can find out what you need from there. Now, what I would say as well for everybody, if you can log on and register on our YouTube site, what you also then get is access to these kind of replays as soon as they're available, so you don't have to wait for emails to come out to tell you when they're available. Any product videos as well are on there as well, so all you need to do is register on our YouTube site, and those become available to you straight away. So the final bit really today is to ask if there's any other questions. So just going to open it out to the team. And really, I suppose it's Robin and Kate. If there are any specific questions, perhaps that you think are relevant to share with anybody, or any questions that haven't been answered, just really over to you two. And it's fine if they're out, by the way.
Mm-hmm. We definitely covered them as they came in.
No, that's fine.
The one question is that people are asking what commode chairs go over the Closomat, and if people weren't watching the chat, Robin put on there a link to what chairs are covered, and I think that might be worth emailing out to people as well, so people have access to that quickly.
Brilliant. Yeah. I'll add that to the content email then. Thanks, Kate. Okay, I think that's it from us then. So just say thanks again to Lucy and to Kimberly for presenting today, and also to Robin and Kate for handling all of the chat that's come in. I know we've had a lot of chat this morning, so appreciate your help. And thanks to everybody again for attending. This will be our last webinar before the summer break, so by all means contact us in between, but if we don't hear or see from you, have a good summer break where you can. And we'll see you all back here at some point in September. So thank you all.
Great.